Why the system rewards fear? Because they want you scared about money. There's a strange feeling many people have experienced recently. You open your phone in the morning, and before the day even begins, the headlines are already telling you something is wrong. The economy is collapsing, inflation is out of control, housing is impossible, the middle class is disappearing, recession is coming, markets are crashing. And if you consume enough of that content in a single week, something subtle starts to happen inside your mind. You begin to feel smaller, not physically, but psychologically. Your financial future begins to feel uncertain. Your confidence starts shrinking. And even if you're working hard, paying your bills, and doing your best to build stability, there's this quiet thought in the background. What if it's already too late? What most people don't realize is that fear is one of the most powerful forces in financial behavior, not just personal fear, but collective fear. And when an entire culture becomes anxious about money, something interesting happens. People stop building and they stop planning and they stop investing and they stop moving forward. And that kind of paralysis is incredibly profitable for certain systems, and which is why today I want to talk about something that rarely gets explained clearly: why fear spreads so easily in financial news, and what the real plan for building wealth actually looks like in a world that constantly tells you it's impossible. Most people assume the news exists purely to inform them, to tell them what's happening in the world. And to some degree, that's true. But there's another reality behind modern media that often goes unnoticed. News organizations compete for attention, and attention is heavily driven by emotion, specifically negative emotion, fear, uncertainty, conflict, urgency. Psychologists have known for decades that human beings are naturally wired to pay more attention to threats than opportunities. It's called negativity bias. Your brain evolved to scan for danger first because historically, noticing threats quickly increased survival. That same psychological wiring is what makes alarming headlines spread faster than calm ones. Market uncertainty attracts more attention than steady economic growth. Financial crisis spreads faster than long term stability. And because news organizations rely on attention to survive, they naturally amplify the stories that trigger stronger emotional reactions, which means financial news often highlights the most dramatic possibilities rather than the most probable outcomes. Not necessarily because anyone is trying to deceive you, but because fear captures attention. And attention drives revenue. When people hear repeated messages that the economy is unstable, something powerful begins happening inside the brain. Uncertainty activates the threat response. Your nervous system begins shifting into protection mode. And when the brain enters protection mode, its priorities change. It stops thinking long term, it focuses on immediate safety. This is an incredibly useful response if you're facing physical danger. But financially, it creates a different kind of problem because wealth building requires long term thinking, investing requires patience, saving requires consistency, entrepreneurship requires calculated risk. But fear shortens your time horizon. When someone feels financially threatened, they begin asking different questions. How do I protect what I have right now? How do I avoid loss? How do I stay safe? Those questions are understandable, but they often prevent people from doing the very things that build wealth over time. This is why markets historically behave in such interesting ways. When fear rises, many people pull their money out of investments. They stop contributing and they pause financial plans. But ironically, those fearful moments are often when long term opportunities appear, not because crises are good, but because fear tends to exaggerate worst case scenarios. And when enough people believe those scenarios, markets overreact. That pattern has repeated throughout modern financial history, during recessions, during housing crashes, during global crises. Fear spreads, people retreat, and eventually recovery quietly begins while most people are still waiting for certainty. There's another reason fear remains so powerful in the financial world. Fear creates passivity. When people feel overwhelmed, they often stop making decisions altogether. They delay investing, they postpone starting businesses, they wait to save until things feel more stable. But stability rarely arrives in the way people imagine. Economic cycles have always existed: booms, slowdowns, recoveries, expansion. The economy has never been permanently calm, and if someone waits for perfect economic conditions before building wealth, they may end up waiting for decades. This is one of the quiet traps of financial fear. It convinces people that the right time to act is always later. But wealth isn't built during perfect moments, it's built through consistent action across imperfect ones. If you look at the lives of people who built long term financial stability, their timelines often include difficult economic periods, recessions, market volatility, inflation, job uncertainty. None of those conditions disappeared. They simply continued building anyway, not recklessly, not blindly, but steadily. They understood something that financial headlines rarely explain clearly. Economic progress happens over long timelines: years, decades, sometimes generations. But news cycles operate on a completely different timeline: hours, days, weeks. The news highlights short term turbulence, but wealth grows through long term compounding, which means the emotional rhythm of the news cycle rarely aligns with the mathematical rhythm of wealth building. At some point, many people realize something important. If you consume enough fear based financial news, you begin seeing the world through a lens of constant instability. But if you step back and observe long term patterns, the story looks different. Over long periods of time, economies tend to grow, technology improves productivity, businesses evolve, markets expand, innovation continues. None of that progress happens smoothly, but it happens consistently enough that long term investors historically benefit from staying engaged rather than retreating. This doesn't mean ignoring risks or pretending economic challenges don't exist. It simply means recognizing that fear based narratives are rarely the full picture. And once someone sees that clearly, their relationship with money begins to change. They stop reacting emotionally to every headline. They begin focusing on systems, habits, consistency, long term direction. So if fear isn't the strategy, what actually is? The real plan for building wealth is surprisingly simple. Not easy, but simple. It begins with financial stability: creating a small emergency fund, reducing high interest debt, building breathing room in monthly finances. Once that foundation exists, the next stage involves consistency: saving regularly, investing regularly, not attempting to predict every economic shift, but allowing time and compound growth to do their work. Compound interest is one of the most powerful forces in finance. Money invested consistently tends to grow over time, not perfectly, but steadily. And when someone combines consistent investing with increasing income over a career, the long term results can be surprisingly powerful. But this process requires patience. And patience becomes difficult when people are constantly surrounded by fear driven narratives, which is why one of the most practical financial habits today isn't just saving or investing, it's managing the information you consume. If someone wants to build wealth in a world filled with alarming financial headlines, the first step is awareness. Recognizing that media incentives often prioritize attention over perspective. The second step is shifting your time horizon. Instead of focusing on the next 6 months, begin thinking in decades. How will your financial habits compound over 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? The third step involves consistency. Small actions repeated monthly tend to matter far more than dramatic decisions made occasionally. Saving $200 per month, investing consistently, reducing unnecessary expenses, allowing compound growth time to accumulate. None of these steps look impressive immediately, but over time, they quietly change financial trajectories. And perhaps the most important step of all is emotional discipline: learning to remain calm during uncertain periods, not because the world is perfectly stable, but because wealth building has never depended on perfect stability. It has always depended on steady behavior. One of the most interesting things about financial history is that every generation believes their moment is uniquely unstable. And in many ways, they're right. Every era faces its own uncertainties, its own economic challenges, its own reasons for fear. But despite those cycles, wealth has continued to be built by people who maintained long term perspective, people who refused to let fear become their financial strategy. They saved, they invested, they built slowly, they allowed time to work in their favor. And over years, sometimes decades, those quiet decisions created freedom, not overnight, not perfectly, but steadily. So if you've ever felt overwhelmed by financial headlines, you're not alone. Fear spreads quickly in uncertain times. But the encouraging truth is this: you don't need perfect economic conditions to begin building wealth. You only need a calm plan, consistent action, and enough patience to let time do what it has always done, which is slowly reward those who keep moving forward.